There are several reasons why testing your product's value messages and overall value story is important. The obvious one, of course, is value selling. We must get the value messages and overall value story of our products and services right in order to be able to sell them at their fair price. But we must also be careful about consumer psychologic effects such as framing and inference. So, if you'd like to know more about why testing value messages is important, as well as what framing and inference are and their role, keep watching. Let's start with the importance of value message testing for value selling. As we all know, these days everyone seems to be pressed for time and at the same time constantly bombarded with calls for attention from all over. This has made us a lot more selective in terms of what we pay attention to. We may not have an attention span smaller than a goldfish's, like some have suggested. After all, we can still concentrate on tasks for long periods of time as long as they are interesting to us, but we do pay less attention to all the different stimuli surrounding us than a goldfish would because there are just too many stimuli. This means that we need to put our product's best foot forward and as quickly as possible because we won't have more than a couple of seconds to grab our potential customer's attention before he moves on to some other distraction. And there are plenty of distractions competing for their attention. The problem here is we often don't really know what our product or service's strongest selling point is before we ask buyers and other people involved with the purchase decision, if those other people exist. I've worked on dozens of projects in which what my client assumed was their product's main selling point turned out to be wrong. And I'm talking about some really large companies with teams of professionals dedicated to this. So it's not always as simple as it seems. What I've noticed is that to begin, when you have a lot of potential selling points, you don't always know which one will be valued most by different purchasing stakeholders. In the absence of a really outstanding and differentiated selling point, which isn't always available. And another issue I've noticed, and which is actually something I struggle a lot with too, is that we tend to become attached to our products and completely lose perspective. I've been in situations in which just by reading the product description, it's hard to believe that the client did not see things that couldn't be more evident if they were written on a neon sign. That's why it's really important that we get feedback from people involved in the purchasing process to make sure that we are selling our product or service based on what matters most to them and not based on some feature that we might have personally fallen in love with. What we think is amazing about our product, especially if it's something that we're really proud to have been able to offer, may just be an okay type of feature for potential buyers. And, believe it or not, the main selling point of a product might not even be the most valuable thing that it has to offer. It may just be something that people want more. Sometimes we just have to sell by highlighting how our product offers something that people really want to buy and discreetly slip in what is really needed and valuable for them, but that isn't something that they're eager to spend their money on. That happens all the time. So we must figure out, 1, what captures people's attention the most so that we can lead with that. And 2, what they value most so we can explain to them how our product offers it once we are able to get their attention. That's one of the reasons why we must test our marketing messages. We need to figure out which of our value claims will be the most successful at doing it. But at the beginning of the video, I also mentioned the psychological effect called framing. So, what's the deal with that? Well, a second reason why it's important to test value messages is that their actual wording may frame people's perception of your product, potentially modifying their attitudes towards it. Let's translate that. So, to test the information framing effect, researchers recruited a group of people to participate in a study in which they would be evaluating participants' attitudes towards the purchase of ground beef. Participants were asked to assess the beef in terms of 4 pairs of attributes: good tasting versus bad tasting, greaseless versus greasy, high quality versus low quality, and finally, lean versus fat. But here's the catch. They never got to taste the beef. Instead, they would have to base their expectations only on the beef's label information regarding fat content. And one more important detail, to half the people, the researchers described the ground beef has 75% lean, and to the other half has 25% fat. Now, 75% lean and 25% fat are not that different, right? Or are they? Let's look at the results. So, in terms of the fat versus lean assessment pair, people to whom the beef had been described as 75% lean expected it to be more towards the lean side, while those to whom it had been described as 25% fat expected it to be more towards the fat side. And similar things happened regarding the other pairs. Those to whom the meat had been described as 75% lean scored it higher in terms of being lean, but also with regards to higher quality, greaseless, and even better tasting. And the differences were statistically significant, just in case you were wondering. But for all the details, I'd suggest you check out the study. It's referenced in the description. So, even though a pound of 75% lean ground beef with any other label is still a pound of 75% lean ground beef, the expectations people have regarding it and consequent purchase likelihood do change depending on how that is stated on the label. But you're probably thinking that if participants had been able to actually try the beef, this difference wouldn't be seen, right? Well, you weren't alone on that one, so a second study was made to test it. In this new study, the rating pairs used were the same as were the two different descriptions, that is, 75% lean and 25% fat. However, this time, participants were allowed to try the ground beef. And to half the participants, the description was read before they tried the beef, and to the other half after they tried it. And the results were: in this slide, you can see the results for the attribute pair fat versus lean as rated by the group to whom the ground beef was described as 75% lean. In the first chart, we have the results from the first study. On the second one, the results for participants to whom the description was read before they tasted the meat, and finally, in the third one, the results from participants to whom the label was read after tasting the meat. So, how did this compare to the results from the groups to whom the meat was described as 25% fat? Let's insert them now. So, as we can see, even though the differences in perceptions of those to whom the meat was described as 75% lean versus those to whom it was described as 25% fat did decrease when participants had a chance to taste the meat, they were still biased by how the meat was described. Even though both descriptions mean exactly the same, the only difference being that in one case it is communicated from a positive perspective and in the other one from a negative perspective. Now, I'm not inserting the results of the other pairs because this would be too long, but if you're curious, you can find them in the original study. Anyway, moving on, the implications of this are huge. This means that the way you communicate your product's value not only sets different expectations on the minds of your potential customers, leading to different purchase likelihoods, but it might also prime them to enjoy your product more or less after they actually use it. So, it's important that you identify what are your product's positive attributes that are more conducive to achieving this result, as well as what the best wording to describe them is. But there's one more important reason why you must test your product's value messages and overall value story. From the previous study's results, one might think that communicating negative aspects, or even neutral ones in a negative way, should be avoided at all costs, right? Makes sense at first glance. But this is where inference comes in. Here's the deal. As consumers, when there's information missing about a product, we tend to either avoid making a purchase at all until we have all the information that we require to feel sure that we're making a good decision, or we fill in the gap created by the missing information with our very own assumptions. This second one is called inference. In the absence of information about a product, potential buyers sometimes just take a guess. Now, Inference is generally a positive thing, since the likely alternative to consumers making up the information by themselves might be not to purchase at all. You may even notice that sometimes in the absence of information, sellers may say something like, I don't know, but I'd assume, or I don't know, but it's usually easy to guess. What they're doing is trying to prevent you from walking away without purchasing anything. But the I'd assume is actually no information at all. It's just a guess that they make to make you feel comfortable about making a decision without all the information that you'd like to have to feel comfortable making that decision. Yes, the I don't know, but I'd assume annoys me a lot, especially when it comes to pricing and confusing terms of service contracts that lock you in for a period of time. I'd assume it's included. Come on, if it's not explicitly stated that it's included, I'd assume it's not. And this is the issue right there. As a consumer, when I'm analyzing a product to decide whether or not to buy it, and I'm missing a piece of information that is relevant, and that is clearly something that people would be expected to ask about, when it's not mentioned, I assume it's missing intentionally, because if it were available, selling the product would be a lot more difficult. And as it turns out, I'm not some weirdo. Well, in this regard at least. When it comes to this particular inference, the general population seems to be on the same page as I am. In the absence of information about a relevant feature that is likely to be a negative aspect of a product, we just assume that it is negative. Now, I'm not going to describe any inference studies here because this is already long and they are a bit more on the complex side. I may do a video on those in the future though. For now, what we must take into account is that we must test not only how what we say resonates with our potential customers, but also how what we don't say impacts their assumptions regarding our offering. Although for framing reasons, it might seem like a good idea to mention only the positives, we must make sure that by not bringing up the negatives, we're not leading people to assume that they're much worse than they really are. A very simple example. If you describe your product as best in class, but say nothing about the price, what do you think people will assume? That's probably expensive, right? That's why sometimes we see ads that after listing a series of outstanding product features add the at a price that's much lower than you would expect for this level of quality. Because copywriters know that you'll be inferring price and that you'll be guessing it will be high. So, we need to test our product's value story and value messages to make sure that we identify the best value selling arguments, the messages that will allow us to frame customers' and potential customers' minds in the most valuable way possible, and what potential negative assumptions people may make about our product when we don't say anything about characteristics relating to relevant purchase decision criteria. In my next video, I'll go over the more practical side of how to test your potential marketing messages for value selling purposes in market research. So if you'd be interested in that, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss it. And that's it for today. I hope it was useful and to see you in the next one. Bye!